Namaskar, I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Welcome to Global Scan, a show that gives you a 360-degree view of the major global developments of the week. Today, we will delve deeper into the issues that lie at the heart of the civil unrest and protest in several countries across the world, from Hong Kong to Iraq to Chile. Huge setback for Pakistan from International Court of Justice for violation of Vienna Convention in Kulbhushan Jadhav case. In other stories, killing of ISIS chief Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and the rise and fall of ISIS. All that and more. First up, the headlines. Donald Trump impeachment efforts pass first test. A Democratic-controlled House voted by 232 to 196. US President calls it the greatest witch hunt in American history. Pakistan violated its obligations under Vienna Convention and appropriate remedies were due in Kulbhushan Jadhav case, says ICJ President to UNGA. House of Lords approves pre-Christmas general elections. Britain heads for an election on December 12th. Pentagon releases the first images from commando raid in Syria in which Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed. Video from an overhead drone shows commandos approaching Baghdadi's compound and aerial strikes carried out. And world celebrates annual Halloween. A US president welcomes children dressed in various outfits. California, New York donned in pumpkin lights. First up, news from America. A deeply divided US House of Representatives took a major step on Thursday in effort to impeach President Donald Trump when lawmakers approved rules for the next more public stage in the Democratic-led inquiry into Trump's attempt to have Ukraine investigate a domestic political rival. In the first formal test of support for the impeachment investigation, the Democratic-controlled House voted almost entirely along the party lines, 232 to 196, to move the probe forward in Congress. The vote allows for public impeachment hearings in Congress, which are expected in the coming weeks, portending a bitter battle ahead as the United States heads into presidential elections next year. Democrats who accuse Trump of abusing his office and jeopardizing the national security for personal political gain were almost unanimous in approving Thursday's measure, but they did not pick up a single Republican vote. Republicans accused Democrats of using impeachment to overturn the results of his 2016 election victory. Moving on, presenting the report of the International Court of Justice to the 193-member General Assembly, International Court of Justice President Judge Abdul Qavi Yusuf said in his judgment that ICJ found that Pakistan had violated its obligations. In a major victory for India, the ICJ had ruled that Pakistan must review the death sentence awarded to Jadhav, a retired Indian Navy officer who was sentenced to death by the Pakistani military court on charges of espionage and terrorism after a closed trial in April 2017. India argued that consular access was being denied to its national in violation of the 1963 Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. Jadhav, 49 years old, a retired Indian Navy officer, was sentenced to death by Pakistani military court on charges of espionage and terrorism after a trial in April 2017. India maintained that Jadhav was kidnapped from Iran, where he had business interest, after retiring from the Navy. So they're a big setback for Pakistan from the International Court of Justice. We'll try and see the highlights of what the International Court of Justice spoke about when it spoke about Pakistan violating the Vienna Convention. Pakistan violated its obligations under Vienna Convention, Kulbhushan Jadhav case. That was the key statement that came out of the International Court of Justice, ICJ. Remember, ICJ had asked Pakistan to provide unfiltered access to Kulbhushan Jadhav to Indian authorities as part of Vienna Convention, given consular access, but Pakistan did not do that. Pakistan violated its obligations under Article 36 of the Vienna Convention. Remember, in September, when access was granted, it was under circumstances, under conditions. Pakistani military and officers were present, and Kulbhushan Jadhav, it was said, was under visible pressure. What were the key points? It said appropriate remedies were due in this case. They have still not been provided. After the July order by the International Court of Justice that Kulbhushan Jadhav must be given consular access through India, it was not really met by Pakistan. On the Jadhav case, ICJ precedent elaborated on 4 important aspects of the ruling. We'll try and look at what those 4 important aspects were while really reprimanding Pakistan for the violation of consular access and Vienna Convention. First, question of inclusion of cases of suspected espionage cases or for consular access. So the issue in question was if a person is being tried for espionage, does Vienna Convention apply? The court said it does. Second, question of whether if a bilateral agreement between the 2 states can supersede Vienna Convention. Referring to the 2008 understanding between India and Pakistan, it said, does it say that Vienna Convention does not apply to these 2 countries? The court said no, there is no such provision, and Vienna Convention does apply, and Pakistan has violated that convention. Let's move on to the third point. The court found that Pakistan has violated the Vienna Convention by denying consular access in the manner in which the court had asked Pakistan to do, in the manner in which India expected Pakistan to have given consular access to Kulbhushan Jadhav. That did not happen in September. It was under conditions. It was in the presence of Pakistani officers, and Kulbhushan Jadhav wasn't really free to talk. He was under visible pressure. Those were the highlights that had come in September earlier. And the court ruled that Pakistan had to grant reparation and remedies, that there is no alternative that Pakistan has. It can't really freely modify the manner in which consular access will be provided to Kulbhushan Jadhav. And if it does not do that, the violation will stand, and Pakistan will have to bear the impact of it because often a violation of Vienna Convention leads to a lot of sanctions. So that would be the road ahead in this particular case. Moving on, legislation to trigger a pre-Christmas general election has cleared its first hurdle in the House of Lords, UK. John Bercow steps down as Common Speaker as his 10-year reign also comes to an end. More details in this report.
Britain's House of Lords began debating on 30th October a bill calling for an election on 12th December to break the Brexit deadlock. And in a rare parliamentary success for British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, after a string of defeats, his short election bill was approved 438 to 20 in the House of Commons on 30th October. Johnson, who had earlier promised to deliver Brexit on 31st October, do or die, demanded a 12th December election after Parliament, where he has no majority. Prime Minister's question time overran on 30th October as Speaker John Bercow chaired for the last time and paid his respects to senior Conservative lawyer Ken Clarke, who will be retiring at the next election after 49 years of uninterrupted service. He called on the Prime Minister to promise a trade deal with the EU that was free of tariffs, free of customs controls and largely free of regulatory distinctions.
And to show that a veteran MP can still look to the future, even one who is retiring from the House, can I ask my right honourable friend to give me some clarity on what he will seek to achieve if by chance he wins this unpredictable general election by way of the permanent relationship that he will have to negotiate between the EU and the United Kingdom as an ex-member. In the years of negotiation that he will have to undertake, will he seek to ensure that we maintain trade and flows of investment between the whole of the United Kingdom and the European Union that are free of tariffs, free of custom controls, largely free of regulatory distinctions, indeed as near as possible to the single market and the customs union that we're in.
House of Lords approved pre-Christmas general election. Britain is heading for an election on 12th December that will determine the outcome of its 3-year Brexit crisis. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
On to our next big story. The Pentagon on October 30th released a video of the raid that led to the death of Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The video shows United States forces approaching the compound and destroying the compound with standoff munitions. U.S. Central Command Commander Kenneth McKenzie Jr. explained the video to the reporters. The release comes just days after U.S. President Donald Trump announced the deaths of al-Baghdadi, describing the operation in detail. Baghdadi died by detonating an explosive-laden vest when he fled the U.S. forces into a dead-end tunnel during the attack, which took place in Idlib region in northwest Syria. Trump said in a televised address to the nation from White House over the weekend.
Now about Baghdadi's last moments. I can tell you this: he crawled into a hole with two small children and blew himself up while his people stayed on the ground. You can deduce what kind of person it is based on that activity. So that would be just my empirical observation of what he did. I'm not able to confirm anything else about his last seconds. I just can't confirm that one way or another. Okay. So I would tell you, we believe that the ages of both children that he took down there with him were under 12 years old. But that's about all I can tell you about that. I can tell you that we believe Baghdadi actually may have fired from his hole in his last moments. The other people that were engaged on the objective were behaving in a threatening manner with suicide vests approaching the raid force, and that causes you to make some decisions, particularly when they don't respond to Arabic language commands to stop, warning shots, and the progression of escalation that our special operators are so very good at.
So al-Baghdadi is killed, he's dead, and the leadership of ISIS is wiped out. Their area of operation, Iraq, Syria, is also cleared of ISIS. It'll be interesting to take a look at the rise and fall of ISIS, and that's what we're going to do next. 2013 was when Al-Qaeda's Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi forms IS, Islamic State, in Iraq, and the Levant is a breakaway faction from the existing terror group Al-Qaeda, and al-Baghdadi is the leader of it, and they're operating in Syria and Iraq, taking advantage of the political, economic instability that exists there. So 2013 was the year of the formation. We go on to the next year, which was very important for the ISIS. It rises to power. 2014, Islamic State overrun Fallujah, that's in Iraq, and Raqqa in Syria. And Raqqa, in fact, becomes their almost de facto capital. That's where the leadership is present. That's where the workers, the fighters plan their attacks and their brutal terror activities. So Raqqa becomes a very crucial point. And 2014, beginning of it, is a time when both these important places, Fallujah and Raqqa, fall to the Islamic State. We'll move on to the other things that happened in 2014. Islamic State captures Mosul, one of the most important and also biggest towns of Iraq, and pushes south to Tikrit. Tikrit, remember, was the hometown of the earlier leader Saddam Hussein. So these were important civilian areas. These are captured by Islamic State, really moving faster than the past world over could imagine and could stop them. Moving on, what else happened in 2014 vis-a-vis Islamic State? Iraqi forces crumbled. The resistance against Islamic State is weak. The Iraqi forces are not able to stop them. The Shiite holy sites are also threatened. So remember, Islamic State really unforgiving in terms of the brutality that they exercise against their opponents. So not only that they killed and massacred their opponents, they also destroyed several religious and historical sites in their terror acts. We'll keep moving ahead in what else happened in 2014. Islamic State declares itself self-styled. After those victories that we spoke about, it declares itself as a caliphate, and al-Baghdadi emerges to the people and speaks about himself as a Khalifa, as the leader of all Muslims of the world. He demands all Muslims to really pay homage to him and listen to the orders that he gives out. And we'll keep going on to the other pointers that happened in 2014. Al-Baghdadi makes his first public appearance. He tries to present himself as the leader of this terror group, and also commands that the Muslims across the world pays heed to his commands, and the other terror groups also must work in coordination with Islamic State. So he tries to emerge as this leader who's completely swept parts of Iraq, making the best use and really exploiting the instability that existed. Moving on, Islamic State captures Sinjar. That's where the Yazidis population was situated, and then begins the atrocities against Yazidis. The men are brutally killed, women, children are taken in as sex slaves, and the brutality really forms a different topic of discussion altogether. The kind of brutality that was meted out to women and children, in particular of the Yazidi community, they in fact form an important part of the resistance later. Moving on, then United States, under leadership of President Obama, launches the first airstrikes in 2014 against Islamic State in Iraq. The world takes notice of their growing power, and this is when United States launches airstrikes. The bombardments start in areas which were captured by the Islamic State in Iraq. That's where it begins. Moving on. We're talking about 2014 here. US-led coalition begins campaign in Syria. So remember, Iraq and Syria were the two key bases of the Islamic State. So Iraq is where it starts, US bombardments, and then the coalition led by the United States also starts its campaign in Syria. The foot soldiers and also airstrikes that try to push the Islamic State fighters. Let's go to the next year, 2015. It's a year of collision. Iraqi Kurdish fighters drive out Islamic State from Mosul, most part of northern Mosul, not whole of Mosul. That takes a lot of more time. So northern Mosul is an important first win for the resistance against Islamic State. That's what Iraqi Kurdish fighters do. And all throughout, we'll keep going on to the next pointers as well. These Kurdish fighters are backed by the US airstrikes. The coalition that we're talking about, these Kurdish fighters, United States, these are important. They're important part of this coalition that's fighting Islamic State in the year 2015. An important year, as we mentioned, Kurdish fighters also defend successfully Kobani in Syria. It's the first really big setback for Islamic State. Hitherto, their movement was really unrestricted. Earlier, Iraqi forces couldn't stop their expansion in Iraq. But when Kobani was defended, there was this hope that Islamic State, in fact, could be brought to its knees and be defeated. So that was an important headway for the Kurdish fighters. Moving on, United States-backed Iraqi forces retake Tikrit. That's while Saddam Hussein's hometown, as we mentioned, it's a big win against Islamic State. So this is when Islamic State, that really expulsion of Islamic State from the territories that they had captured had begun. So the taking over of Tikrit was an important win, first win against the war against terror, war against Islamic State. We'll go on to the next pointers. Islamic State captures Palmyra. So remember, they're being defeated, but they're also creating a lot of destruction. Meanwhile, IS captures Palmyra, the Buddhist statues, if you remember, they were destroyed completely. Centuries-old Buddhist heritage was destroyed in Palmyra by the Islamic State. So it was manner in which their attack really worked, not only on the people, but also on the heritage. Moving on, Islamic State in 2016, how do they fare? Iraqi forces recapture Ramadi after a long fight. There's a long fight that goes on for weeks and months. Also, there's a large-scale destruction. There's a lot of collateral damage. People have to flee while the fight between the Islamic State and the Iraqi forces happens in 2016. Fallujah, remember, one of the first places in Iraq that Islamic State captured in 2014, is also declared liberated. Again, a big win against Islamic State. Meanwhile, while this is happening, Islamic State suicide bomb attack in Baghdad kills 300 people. It's a truck laden with bombs and it's really rammed into this public space, and 300 had killed. And remember, this was also the time there were terror attacks world over which were showing allegiance to Islamic State. Islamic State would claim a lot of attacks across the world in Europe and elsewhere. Moving on to our next slide on what was happening in 2016, Islamic State bomb attack in Baghdad, as we mentioned, killed 300 people, one of the major terror attack, one of the major instances of brutality. Let's move on to the next slide. In 2016, Iraqi Prime Minister announces operation to liberate Mosul. Mosul, remember, one of the most important towns of Iraq, one of the biggest, in fact, second biggest, and Iraqi Prime Minister talks about a cohesive effort to liberate Mosul because that would be one of the biggest dent to Islamic State. Let's go on to the next slide. In 2016 again, US-backed Kurdish forces launch Operation Euphrates Wrath. So really moving towards the final stage of defeating Islamic State, Euphrates Wrath. We're right now only looking at the highlights. There were different instances of the rise and fall of Islamic State. We're only looking at the most key instances that happened. To the next slide, if you can turn to. In 2016, Eastern Mosul is liberated. Earlier, northern Mosul was liberated. Now the eastern Mosul is liberated. It's a huge Iraqi town, second biggest, and part by part, the resistance, the security forces are able to liberate the region from the clutches of the Islamic State. 2017, we reach Eastern Mosul is also liberated, and it's an important movement ahead for the security forces in the fight against terror. Moving on to the next slide, 2017, US-backed SDF, Syrian Defense Forces, in fact, begin attack on Raqqa. from three sides. Remember, as I said earlier, Raqqa was the de facto capital of the Islamic State in Syria. That's where the leadership operated from. So a major attack began in US leadership. Iraqi forces launched battle for Mosul's old city. So Iraqi forces trying to go deeper into Mosul and recapture the most important hub of the Islamic State in Iraq and also recover their own town. Moving on, in 2017, Islamic State destroys Al-Nuri Mosque, another centuries old. So these were a lot of instances where even while we were being defeated at one part in one part of Syria and Iraq, they were going ahead with destruction of monuments, of lives continuously. And one of the reasons why they were known for the brutality. And this was also the time a year ago when they control over 1/3 of Iraq and Syria. So part of the destruction that they did, 2017, Iraqi Prime Minister declares victory over Islamic State in Mosul. Mosul finally is cleansed of Islamic State, of the terror rule of Islamic State, and Mosul finally in 2017 is declared terror-free by the joint efforts of the US-backed forces and also the Iraqi forces. In 2017, SDF, Syrian Defense Forces, we're talking about Iraq and Syria simultaneously, take control of Raqqa after months of bombardment, large-scale destruction, people flee. The refugee crisis that we see in the world, part of the reason is also the kind of fight that was on there. But finally, Islamic State is driven out of Raqqa, which was their really capital of the Islamic State that they talked about. Moving ahead in 2017, Syrian government forces backed by Russia reclaims the Islamic State territory. So Russia also, their forces also comes into play, and the role that they played in defeating the Islamic State and their fighters in the region of Syria. Remember, Syrian government and Russians were close. They were in alliance together. Moving on to our next slide on rise and fall of ISIS. We're talking about 2018. Al-Baghdadi's audio resurfaces. Al-Baghdadi, all this while for about a year till 2018 hadn't really made his presence felt. There was no video that came out. And audio resurfaces. He urges followers to fight. Remember, ISIS was also known for its brutality. There were beheadings that took place on video. He resurfaces and asks his fighters to continue. Al-Baghdadi audio resurfaces. Then SDF wins the last highest territory on Syria's east. That's Deir al-Zur. Another important victory for the Syrian forces against al-Baghdadi and ISIS. That's happening in 2018. Really, ISIS is moving towards its eventual defeat and cleansing. We'll go on from 2018 to 2019. This year, SDF, Syrian Defense Forces, capture Baghuz, declare the end of territorial caliphate of the Islamic State. So on geographical land, there is no Islamic State, is what the SDF said. So an important victory and fall of Islamic State. And finally, the news that emerged just a few days ago, that al-Baghdadi, US President Donald Trump announces that al-Baghdadi is killed in Idlib, Syria, in a US raid. So really a huge relief for the world, and also security forces fighting the scourge of Islamic State for all these years. And 2019 is when the leadership, they say, is finally eliminated. We'll move on to our next story now. It was a jam-packed day for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was in Riyadh for a day-long visit. Prime Minister said bilateral meetings with the Saudi King, Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Several MOUs were signed in the areas of defense, energy, healthcare, and so on. India also became the 8th nation that signed an agreement to set up a strategic partnership council with Saudi Arabia. Here's more.
King Salman of Saudi Arabia welcoming Prime Minister Narendra Modi for the second time since 2014. This is their first meeting since Prime Minister Narendra Modi was sworn in for his second term. King Salman congratulated the Prime Minister for his massive victory in the general elections. Terrorism also came up for discussion between the two leaders.
Both leaders condemned terrorism in all its form and manifestations and appreciated the close cooperation on security matters between the two countries.
Prime Minister Modi also held bilateral talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. These culminated in the inking of nearly a dozen MOUs and agreements. Taking the India-Saudi strategic partnership forward, the two countries signed an agreement to set up the Strategic Partnership Council. Ensuring engagement at the highest level, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Crown Prince Salman will head the council. It will comprise of two verticals. One of the verticals will be headed by the foreign ministers of both nations and the other one by the commerce and industry and trade ministers. With this, India joins 7 other countries that include the UK, the United States, France, Germany, South Korea and Japan, who share a similar arrangement with Saudi Arabia.
हमारा सऊदी अरब से नाता हजारों वर्ष का रहा है। ऐसी दोस्ती रही है जैसे आप कहते हैं सदाकत को, कि एक दूसरे के वहां हमें अपनापन लगता है। हमारे ऐतिहासिक संबंधों और संपर्कों ने हमारी स्ट्रैटेजिक पार्टनरशिप को मजबूत बुनियाद भी रखी है। और आज हमने क्राउन प्रिंस के साथ बातचीत में स्ट्रैटेजिक पार्टनरशिप काउंसिल की स्थापना करके अपने संबंधों को नई ऊंचाई प्रदान की है।
An MOU on defense industries cooperation as well as an agreement on security cooperation was also concluded. Expanding energy collaboration, an MOU on a joint venture between Indian Oil Middle East and Al Jairi Company of Saudi Arabia for downstream cooperation in setting up retail outlets in Saudi Arabia was also inked. Another one involving Saudi participation in India's strategic petroleum reserves was also signed. The aim of these pacts is transforming the buyer-seller relationship in this sector into a much larger strategic partnership. Both sides concluded an MOU to enhance cooperation in renewable energy. An MOU to launch RuPay card in Saudi Arabia has also been signed. This will be very useful for the large Indian community as well as Hajj and Umrah pilgrims. An MOU on Hajj-related cooperation has also been inked. A bilateral air services agreement as well as one on Atal Innovation Mission has also been entered into. An MOU between the stock exchanges of both countries has also been signed. In addition to this, MOUs in the areas of medical products regulation, diplomatic institute cooperation, drug trafficking were also signed. Earlier in the day, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also had useful discussions with Saudi Energy Minister as well as Minister of Labour and Social Development and Minister of Environment, Water and Agriculture. Though a short visit, it proved to be very intense and strong on deliverables, cementing hopes to further strengthen the growing strategic relationship between India and Saudi Arabia. With Kanchan Prasad and Arun Sharma in Riyadh, Bureau Report, DD News.
Now, weeks after weeks, we get you updates about the widespread civil protest, unrest in different parts of the country, and we're going to get you some more images that are driving people onto the streets against their own governments at many places. In Iraq, protests have been leaderless, but mostly driven by young and unemployed people in a country with stubbornly high jobless rate, where nearly a quarter of the population live in poverty. In Hong Kong, 5 months in, number of people taking part in the protest has waned. But the controversial extradition bill that has also been withdrawn, still the unrest shows few signs of ending soon. In Lebanon, cross-section of society appears to be represented in protest against the government. Around 1.3 million people, that's about 20% of the population, are thought to have attended the largest demonstration so far. Meanwhile, in Chile, the protest began in Santiago as youth-led mutiny and students remain at the movement's heart. Rebellion has swelled to towns and cities outside of the capital. Citizens of all ages and social classes have now joined in. Moving on, firefighters and residents battled raging wildfires that broke out in California's Los Angeles on Wednesday. The fire erupted in Ventura County's Simi Valley near Getty Center Museum, displacing thousands of residents from the area. The fire in Simi Valley prompted evacuation of an estimated 7,000 homes, affecting over 26,000 people. The flames destroyed 8 structures, damaged 5 others, and also affected the University of California in Los Angeles, about 2 miles from Getty Center. The fires also threatened to destroy Ronald Reagan Presidential Library outside Los Angeles, prompting authorities to order evacuation in the area around the library. While the firefighters tried to extinguish the wildfire, winds approximately 30 to 40 miles per hour are what is fanning the fires now. The firefighters said the weather conditions and fierce winds hurled the whole process. Well, trick or treat, it's Halloween. From United States to United Kingdom, ordinary pumpkins were carved out and transformed into works of art as the world undertook annual Halloween celebrations on Wednesday. US President Donald Trump and the First Lady welcomed the little goblins, superheroes and dinosaurs to the White House to celebrate Halloween. Military families, local school children and their families attended the festivities and received commemorative candy and souvenirs from the President and the First Lady. The White House was decorated with scores of pumpkins, enchanted trees and vines. The annual holiday, U.S. Air Force String Ensemble played a mix of popular spooky tunes as the children and their families took part in the festivities. In California's Los Angeles, over 1,000 pumpkins transformed into artworks like Mona Lisa and spooky figures like Frankenstein monster. Professional artists painted the images on 75 oversized pumpkins and then delicately removed the layers of the skin in varying depths to render light and dark areas where the pumpkins were illuminated. The pumpkins illuminated a mile-long tree-lined path in Botanical Garden just outside of Californian City. And the Halloween fever gripped people in New York as well. The great Jack-o'-lantern Blaze 49th Night Halloween Extravaganza featured more than 7,000 illuminated Jack-o'-lanterns at Van Corden Manor and Croton-on-Hudson. New to the great Jack-o'-lantern Blaze is an immersive display of Headless Horseman Bridge. Switzer estimates an event will host 180,000 visitors this year. Time now for updates from the world of sports. Bangladesh's Test and T20 captain Shakib Al Hasan on Tuesday was suspended for 2 years by the International Cricket Council (ICC) for not reporting a corrupt approach, ruling him out of the tour of India, which starts on November 3rd. Shakib has been handed a full ban for a year and 12-month suspended sentence. The 32-year-old was being kept away from the team's practice on ICC's instructions. The series against India comprises 3 T20 International and 2 Test. He will miss next year's Indian Premier League and also the World T20 to be held in Australia from 18th October to 15 November 2020. 2 years ago, a bookie had approached Shakib with an offer before an international match, which he did not report to the ICC's Anti-Corruption and Security Unit. The ban will compound Bangladesh Cricket Board's problems ahead of the tour of India. Time now for news from the world of cinema. And in Cinema Scan, we bring you all that is creating buzz in the worlds of films and drama.
Bring me out. Can you introduce me as Joker?
Director Todd Phillips' Joker, starring actor Joaquin Phoenix, continues to make headlines. This time by beating Disney's Maleficent, Mistress of Evil at the box office. Joker has topped the box office charts in the United States with ticket sales of $18.9 million over the weekend, higher than Maleficent's $18.5 million. Joker took down the Mistress of Evil by a narrow margin. Phillips' dark drama Joker has generated $277 million in North America and $571 million at the international box office, collecting $849 million worldwide, making it the most successful R-rated movie in history.
When you bring me out.
Hollywood is saluting women power. Lena Wertmuller, the first woman ever to be nominated for an Oscar for directing, was honored in Hollywood on Monday with her own star on the Walk of Fame. Wertmuller, who has worked in numerous elements of filmmaking from acting to script writing, was honored with the 2,679th star on the Walk of Fame. The star, whose films include The Seduction of Mimi, Love and Anarchy and Swept Away, was the first female filmmaker to have a film select for the prestigious Cannes Film Festival in the early 1970s.
No, he can't break radio silence.
Sooner or later, the hard work pays off for German film director Roland Emmerich. It has finally paid after 20 long years. The director's dream project, Midway, is finally set to be released in November, after waiting nearly 20 years to produce the epic blockbuster. Packed with action and drama, the war film focuses on real-life events during the Battle of Midway, a clash by air and sea which pivoted the Allied forces towards victory in the Pacific Theater during World War II. The battle took place in June 1942, 6 months after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor and 1 month before the Battle of the Coral Sea. Midway was rekindled several years ago when work on a script began. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And with that, we conclude this edition of Global Scan. News and updates continue after a short break. Namaskar.